When I was young, around the age of 4 or 5, I used to drag a chair from my bedroom all the way across the landing and stand on it, looking out of the window onto the street below. The house I lived in was on a row of houses called a crescent, but it was more like a giant oval roundabout, with houses on the inside and houses on the outside. It was a safe place to play, like a mini estate, with only the people who lived there driving around the one-way system. So as you can probably imagine, there were lots of kids playing on it. There were bikes and skateboards strewn everywhere, cricket, tennis, football matches, giant games of tag and hopscotch and skipping ropes. A car would enter the crescent and a rally car cry would go out, carried like a beacon down the street. Everything got picked up and dumped on the verge, and then brought straight back into the road once the car had passed. All weathers these kids were out there, jumping in the giant puddles in the spring rains, running around barebacked and in shorts when the sun blazed. And all weathers, I watched them from my window. I would stand on my chair, studying the ebbs and flows of groups of children that endlessly ran and ran, looking like a murmur of starlings or a school of fish. Synchronized, unspoken, and unanimous movement as they gathered their things out of the path of an oncoming car and then flooded back out onto the road when it rolled on by. I ached for them to knock for me, to lure me into this bedazzling world of movement and noise I witnessed unfolding before me every day. And they often did. I would watch them walk onto our drive, and my heart would start to pound and hammer in my chest. My hands would involuntarily curl into tight fists, my fingertips, with nails bitten to the quick, pressed hard into my sweating palms. They came to my door, and I would sink onto the chair, knees up, as small as possible. The knock would come. The noise would reverberate and echo around inside my head. My thoughts would freeze in that cavernous space between my ears, so usually filled with rumbling gears and constant considerations and memory. And the knock would bounce around inside there, getting louder and louder until it matched the thumping of my heart. Bang! 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 My mum would answer the door. There'd be a muttering that I'd be unable to understand and make sense of over the continuing noise of the drumming in my skull. Then she'd appear at the foot of the stairs, looking up at me huddled tight on this chair, rocking ever so slightly. The same line every time, rote and repetition. Do you want to go out and play? Crying yes, 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 with the roar of a crowd inside my skull. I'd give a barely perceptible shake of my head. Mum would look at me with disappointment and vanish. More mutterings, and the door would close. The child would return to its dance through the streets, and I would uncurl slowly, slide from the chair, and disappear into my room. Shell-shocked, exhausted, and broken-hearted. This describes me at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, onwards and onwards. That window was my watchtower, my observatory. I wanted to play with them. I was desperate to play with them, but doing so hurt. I tried to join in the games at school and got lost amidst unspoken rules or rules that made no sense, that were illogical and mindless, that changed minute by minute, and everyone seemed to know how and why. I stood on the edge of the playground, watching, analysing, every so often attempting to join in, but every time it led to my confusion, my heartache. So the patterns in clouds or leaves became more important. The world inside my head beckoned because those things were safe and manageable and understandable. Interacting with the real world became a lesson in masking and contextless mimicry. I grew into a teenager and I stood on the edge of life, in bars and nightclubs, drinking furiously, a flurry of amphetamines, trying hard to be like everyone else, trying hard to fill the gaping void inside myself that was the absence of normality that everyone else seemed to have. I stood on the edge of the workplace, masking harder than ever, watching as colleagues danced the same dances as those children in my street, a school of fish shimmering and flickering and seamlessly moving as one through the ocean of socialness. I stood, near permanently, millimeters away from the end of my mortality, where stepping out was a lure of dissolving into an oblivion of not being different and apart. I stood, searching endlessly for something, without knowing or understanding what that was. I was never aware that what I was looking for was the recognition of my identity and the validation of my culture. Culture is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as the way of life of a people, including their attitudes, values, beliefs, religion, arts, sciences, modes of perception, and habits of thought and activity. The Centre for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition goes a step further, defining culture as shared patterns of behaviours and interactions, cognitive constructs and understanding that they're learned by socialisation. Thus, culture can be seen as the growth of a group identity, fostered by social patterns unique to that group. Both of these quotes identify what is happening to the autistic community, the cultural identity that exists already within autistic people independently, and then the growth and development of that cultural identity as more and more autistic people connect. The description of me as a child earlier is a description which provides the context of a member of a particular culture existing within another culture, unable to utilize innate cultural behaviors, cognitive constructs and understanding, because to do so would cause the invalidation of those things, would induce trauma. The autistic community is a culture that has been kept apart from itself and disseminated across the planet. It is traditionally non-geographical, separated not only by borders and oceans, but also by the separation of self. Being isolated from the knowledge of who we are and the shared experience of others like us has caused literal schisms in identity that have only recently started to become recognized in the narratives around trauma, stigma, and masking, narratives driven by autistic people. We are still a non-geographical culture in the most part, but have found a unique way to connect with each other and strengthen our cultural identity. The creation of the internet, arguably by autistic people, and the further creation of social media, also arguably by autistic people, anecdotally highlights a sense of purpose and the need for connectivity to enable the strengthening of those cultural bonds that previously existed within us in isolation. The outcome of this autistically social connectivity has been the confirmation and strengthening of definable cultural identifiers. Again, if we define culture as the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, social habits, music, arts, and even cuisine, all those things exist within the autistic community. Today is an enormous celebration of the existence of that culture. We are here literally exploring autistic language, social habits, music, and art based around the medium of a religion that is predominantly autistic, the pursuit of knowledge. The autistic community exists as a culture in its infancy, still finding its feet and learning to fight off the shackles of marginalization and battling against its own internalized ableism. But within that, we have, over the last 30 years, developed our own language to express notions previously uninterpreted by the non-autistic world, and use typically autistic communication methods to deliver those notions, something which is pathologized by the non-autistic world and seen as deficit. We share a relatable behavioral existence that's framed by the need to socialize the way that we need to, something else we have been invalidated and pathologized over, but which studies like diversity and social intelligence are validating now. Our learning and sensory needs are driven by autistic monotropic neurology, which is at the heart of our existence, but which again is defined as a deficit because it doesn't quite match up with the neurotypical idea of normal existence. We have the development of art and language and music, which grows from, encapsulates, and further defines our existence. And if same foods aren't a perfect example of a culturally defining cuisine, I don't know what is. We have innate knowledge of our autistic culture within us. It's all there, but very early on, it's something that we are forced to suppress, forced to swallow deep inside because the expression of that culture is pathologized and condemned by the non-autistic world, seen systemically and individually as something that causes concern, seen as something to change, and is rarely embraced. We all want not to be coerced and subjugated. We all want not to be forced to live our lives as power limitations of ourselves, to not hide in fear behind a mask, to not kill ourselves doing that. We want meaningful lives and love and happiness. And to achieve those things, what we need is our culture identified, because every problem that a non-autistic person faces in interactions with autistic people is not an issue of deficits, but an issue of one culture butting up against another culture. As one example, social skills training is the imposition of a majority neuroculture's belief, ideals, and will over a minority neuroculture. The focus needs to be on balance. Showcasing non-autistic communication and social skills to autistic people is fine, as long as that is done in balance with showcasing autistic communication and social skills to non-autistics, alongside validating the need for both groups to exist as they need to. We do have to live alongside non-autistic people, but they also have to live alongside us. And unfortunately, despite existing in large numbers, it is only non-autistic communication and social norms and skills that are validated. As things stand, we have a majority neuroculture that imposes its beliefs, ideals, and will on a minority neuroculture, the imposition of which is underpinned by the majority neurocultural belief that their way is the only way. That's privilege, though. When you go to another country, there is an expectation that you will attempt to learn the language and respect that culture, but you are not expected to never ever use your own language again and discard and suppress your own culture forever. This further falls down when you consider that neuroculture is non-geographical. Two neurocultures or more coexist in a shared space, but only one is ever recognized and identified. All those cultures deserve respect, but currently are not given that respect because neuroculture A dominates and refuses to recognize neuroculture B in any way other than as a deficit version of neuroculture A. From an autistic perspective, in order to correct this, we need to do something drastic. We need to stop talking about ourselves. I'm often asked to speak, and I'm often asked to speak about my life, my personal experience, but my story is unimportant. Why? Because the geography changes, but the story stays the same. Nearly all autistic people have one major thing in common aside from being autistic, and that's our lives. The isolation, the loss, the lack of belonging, the invalidation. Being asked to talk about my lived experience is not something I do because it's tokenistic. It becomes about me. In the eyes of the audience, autism becomes me. And I'm unimportant. It's a tool used to divide us, as much as the phrase, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, has been warped and twisted from its original meaning to now also divide us, to be thrown back at us as a reason that we cannot be a voice for a community, only for ourselves as individuals. We are denied the authority to talk about us collectively, when everyone who is not us is talking about us collectively. My story is unimportant because it's us who are important. Our collective stories, the weight of our collective lives are what matters. The collective expression of autistic culture. My responsibility when I talk to anyone is all of us. It's not to tell people about my life, but to be a platform for all autistic lives. That's what's missing from the narrative of autism. A narrative driven by the autism industry, the media, professionals, academia, usually everyone but the very people they're talking about. Ironically, with regards to the isolation, the loss, the lack of belonging, autistic culture is wrapped in all those things. Autistic culture is soaked in trauma, the expression of our trauma, defining our trauma, sharing our trauma, consoling each other over our trauma. To be invalidated and stigmatized over a lifespan for the way we move, think, feel, act, communicate, eat, love, express ourselves cannot help but need to be dissected, explored, and shared, and it often is. Daily, autistic people are broken upon the back of the wheel of society. We are treated, electrocuted, bullied, beaten, assumed to be incompetent, locked in institutions, wrapped, collated, force-fed, bleached, normalized, cast out, denied jobs, arrested, incarcerated, lied to, abused, fired, stem-celled, given a multitude of diets, shoved in hyperbaric chambers, researched to within an inch of our lives, lied about, and invalidated. An infinity of myth perpetuates societal conscience about us, and decisions are made based upon belief of those myths. This negative narrative that controls and dictates every breath we take, all of which is an invalidation and perpetuation of the marginalization of autistic culture and existence. All of which uses the tools of language, of haves, withs, living with, and suffers from, that is designed to isolate ourselves from the most fundamental aspect of who we are. All of which causes a fracturing of our identity, a disconnection from our innate cultural knowledge. The current culture of autism is that professionals decide what we need. Professionals train other professionals. Professionals apply the services, and then professionals pat each other on the back and tell each other what a good job they've done. All of these professionals are telling everybody different things. Each are biased towards the studies of different researchers. Each are paid by different organizations and follow different agendas. Each follow different philosophies and each use external observations based on different models of very narrow and poorly defined diagnostic criteria, all written by professionals. Professionals who insist on using person-first language, who talk about the importance of recognizing the person and not the diagnosis. Professionals who then talk about autism, like we, autistic people, aren't even in the room, who can't recognize that there is a person right in front of them, with the same thoughts and feelings, hopes and dreams, the same bones and blood and sinews as any other person. An autistic person, an autistic human being. The hubris of people who stand and observe us and decide they understand who we are because they watch our external behavior. External behavior often driven to extremes by anxiety caused by the environments the professionals have put us in the first place. Because of them, we've gone from generations of undiagnosed autistics who spent our lives suffering because of ignorance, not because of autism, convinced that something was wrong with us, to now generations of diagnosed autistics who may as well go undiagnosed because of either the lack of support or inappropriate therapies offered to them, and who are led to believe that there is still something wrong with them. Diagnosed children who go through exactly the same experiences at school as those of us who are undiagnosed did, unsupported through sensory overwhelm, confusion, a lack of understanding and acceptance, not helped to recognize and learn about their autistic identity, along with the expectation of fitting in and normalization, excluded and denied their autistic culture. Or undiagnosed children, huge waiting lists, decisions made not to diagnose because of myths such as they have friends or they make good eye contact. The geography changes, but the stories remain the same. And outside of autistic people, never once has the lens of culture ever been looked through, because it's all based on a different concept, which is at the core and is the foundation of the whole autism narrative. A narrative which states that we are broken versions of neurotypicals. I ask you this. Autism describes our neurology. Neurology describes neurological process. Is neurological process restricted to what goes on inside our heads? No. Autism is every fiber of our being, every aspect of our senses. We interpret information autistically. We send signals autistically. We make decisions with our autistic brains based on an autistic nervous system. So tell me, does autism define us? Hell yes, it does. It can be denied by anyone who cares to, but it does not change the fact that an autistic person is autistic from their toes to their fingers to the top of their head. Autism defines us because we are autistic. That there is our identity, with a million things that shape us like they shape everyone. Life experiences, loves and hates, illnesses, jobs, the roles we have as partners, parents, children, the way we treat people, the way they treat us back, the colour of our skin, our religions, our gender, our sexual proclivities, the language we use, the behaviour we express, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we interpret the world and find meaning in it. All driven by autistic neurology, and so all definable as the expression of autistic culture. The autistic experience of autism is what binds our community together. It's what is at the heart of autistic culture. Despite the many disagreements that ravage our fledgling community, as can be found within any culture, the internal experience of autism is shared and relatable. The emotional impact of the world on us as autistic people is shared and relatable. The assumptions remain, though, that we don't have voices, in whatever form they come, and so can't speak for ourselves, that autism somehow stops at 16. It explains why we are kept apart from our own narrative and only allowed to dictate our lives and our futures through tokenism or as research subjects, where we are seen as not competent enough to make decisions for ourselves, with experts and family members' views given precedent over our own. It's why our culture is never recognized as such. All of this is driven by fear. Our existence threatens the herd of humanity who rail against change, whose inflexibility of thought makes a mockery of the fact that we are accused of inflexibility of thought. who accuse us of being unempathetic and yet have no empathy for us. The recognition of different neurocultures means the recognition that the current one way of being is not correct, is harmful, is a lie, is a sham, is imperfect and fallible. Society fears autistic people. We threaten the dominant hierarchy. We challenge social systems. We are the square pegs that don't fit into the neurotypical round holes. This fear of difference shows why autism is still seen consciously and subconsciously as a childhood condition, and in the eyes of society makes autistic adults into Peter Pan versions of ourselves. We're looked at as though we never grew up, that we're incompetent, that we work on child-level emotional intelligence, that rainbow-coloured jigsaw pieces litter our wake when we walk, because then we are manageable and controllable. We're reduced to children. Children aren't allowed to speak for themselves. We're separated from humanity, othered and marginalized. Autistic children need to be taught about autism. Autistic children need to be connected and immersed in autistic culture. They need to spend time in the company of other autistic children and adults. They need to learn who they are and be armed with the reasons why they think the way they do, why things hurt them that don't hurt others, why non-autistic adults have expectations of autistic children that they would not even have of themselves. Newly diagnosed autistic adults need to be taught about autism, not by being signposted to the National Autistic Society helpline, but by being surrounded by the very much non-touching embrace of autistic people who understand and have the knowledge to advise and help them to understand themselves. By being connected to and immersed in autistic culture, people who are lost and who are now home. We have a responsibility as autistic people to understand not just our own autistic selves, but our collective autistic experience and the whole sordid history of half-truths and mistakes that lie behind what have separated us from those things. You have a responsibility, if you are not autistic, to see your privilege, to reframe your thinking through this cultural lens, to look for strengths instead of deficits, to recognize and embrace the diversity and humanity instead of forever falling back to the laughable, egotistical notion that there is a normal and that you are it. One day, hopefully, autistic people will embrace the beating heart of our culture and have our culture embraced, all through recognizing that this is the core and foundation of our culture. Our writing, our songs, our poetry, our art, our acting, our science, our technology, our engineering, our love, our language, our communication, our social skills, our movement, our cuisine, our humor, our thought, our humanity, our existence, our autistic culture. The threads of which are out there, just waiting to be pulled together by an autistic community which understands itself, understands the context of its hardships, and is prideful of its existence, which recognizes the culture within itself, engages in restorative justice, and is externally validated by the culture it's been forced to adopt. The world needs to finally see us for who we truly are.